Hello everyone and welcome to the AI Research Roundup. I'm your host Alex and today we're diving into some fascinating AI research. We'll be looking at a paper called Beyond Outlining Heterogeneous Recursive Planning for Adaptive Long-Form Writing with Language Models. Essentially this paper tackles the challenge of getting AI agents to write long texts like reports or stories more adaptively like humans do. Current methods often get stuck using a rigid outline-first approach, which limits flexibility. This paper proposes a new framework that uses recursive planning and dynamically mixes retrieval reasoning and writing tasks, allowing for more flexibility during the writing process itself. Okay, so let's look at Figure 1 here. This diagram gives us a nice abstract view of how these core tasks, retrieval reasoning and composition, interact within the system. You can see we have these boxes representing the database, the agent's memory, and the workspace where the actual writing happens. The arrows show the flow. Retrieval pulls info from the database into memory. Reasoning then works on stuff in memory. See that loop? And finally, composition takes information from memory to actually modify the workspace, to write the text. The key here is how these different task types modify the system states along the way. Okay, so Figure 2 shows us some evaluation results, comparing this new method against a baseline called Agents Room. What's interesting here is that they break it down by different generation lengths. You see 2K, 4K, and 8K words, and across different quality metrics like plot creativity and overall quality. Notice the orange bars, which represent wins for this paper's method. They generally get much higher as the text gets longer compared to the green loss bars, suggesting this approach really shines for longer, more complex writing tasks. So building on those pairwise comparisons we saw earlier, Table 1 gives us a closer look at the quantitative scores, specifically for story generation. It compares this paper's method, ours, against the end-to-end, and Agents Room baselines using different models like GPT-4o and Claude 3.5 Sonnet. You can see scores for things like plot creativity and overall quality. Well, the key takeaway is that the ours method consistently gets the highest scores you see them in, bold across all these areas for both models. The ablation rows also show that removing either recursive planning or task type awareness hurts performance significantly. Okay, now shifting gears from story writing. Table 2 shows us results for a different task report generation using the WildSeq dataset. Similar to the last table, it compares the hours method against other baselines like Storm and Company Storm across different models. The quality metrics here are relevance, breadth, depth, and novelty. Well, again, looking at the bolded scores, the hours method consistently comes out on top across all these areas for the different language model backbones. And just like before, the ablation row without HRP shows that removing the hierarchical recursive planning component does impact the results, highlighting its contribution. Okay, so Figure 3 gives us a concrete example of how this recursive planning works for fiction writing. You see the initial instruction at the top, asking for a 5,000-word story about a couple in a snowy cabin with a dog and a dream twist. Then below that, the process section shows how the agent breaks this down. It uses these think and write tasks, recursively planning things like character design, plot structure, and atmosphere, and then breaking the actual writing down into smaller, manageable sections with specific word counts. This really illustrates that hierarchical decomposition we talked about and how it mixes planning and writing. So, building on that planning example we just saw in Figure 3, Figure 4 actually shows us a snippet of the story that the agent produced. Remember the prompt was about a couple, a dog, a snowy cabin, and a twist. Well, this is part of the resulting text. It gives you a feel for the actual writing quality, the descriptive language, and the narrative flow that comes out of that whole recursive process of thinking and writing sections we looked at just before. It's the end product of that adaptive approach. Okay, so seeing that snippet really shows the result of that whole process. I think the big takeaway here is how this heterogeneous recursive planning, mixing those think and write steps, lets the AI adaptively tackle really long and complex writing tasks. It's a promising direction for making AI-generated content much more sophisticated and human-like. Well, that wraps up this episode of the AI Research Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I'm your host, Alex.